The machine of nihilism has brought us to our knees. The spirit of the times is dark, and the future seems unimaginable. The most perverse thoughts have become reality, and the most ruthless deaths imaginable have been executed. Things can't get much worse. As we sit in a comfortable room, the thought that things can't get much worse seems arguable. Yet this statement rings true with the thousands that are dying in the grip of the modern machine. While at a concert, this one person saw the ugliness of it all and came to the conclusion: in the middle of a song, the music was as loud as music can get without making one totally deaf. The room was dark and filled with smoke, with the words of modern prophets written in graffiti on the walls. The words from the mouth of the singer as he slashed himself were scarred for life. He screamed it from the depths of his being. The music sounded like factory machinery. Reveling in the music and sounds I liked so much, I suddenly realized how awful this all was. The thought came to me: things can't get much worse. Things are beyond the point of no return. We've gone too far as a society, and there seems to be no turning back. There is one simple point that illustrates this. Nothing is shocking anymore. We are no longer shocked when we go to the theater or see a movie about a cannibalistic murderer who is the hero of the show. We are no longer touched or horrified when people are depicting being graphically tortured and murdered. We tell ourselves that it's only harmless entertainment. We are no longer shocked when we watch the news about the latest war atrocity or see video posts of someone being attacked. We are numb when we see how a man murders his own family, then takes his own life. Or when yet another deranged person shoots up a school, or another gang causes blood to flow in our neighborhood streets. Nothing is shocking anymore. We are spectators, watching on while others suffer until the suffering happens to us. Our acceptance of violence is awful in itself, but in addition to this, we have grown accustomed to living in this modern urban wasteland. We surround ourselves in concrete and steel. We consume extraordinary amounts of stuff wrapped in plastic, rubber, and styrofoam. In the span of all human existence, in just under 200 years, we have created the conditions for the apocalypse. So we are left to ask one question: what shall be the sign of the end of the world? And as we ask this question, our heart skips a beat. We are told prophetically by Jesus Christ in Matthew 24, "You shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famine and earthquakes in various places. All of these are the beginning of sorrows." Then they shall hand you over to be tortured, and shall put you to death, and you shall be hated by all nations because of my name. Then many will fall away and shall betray one another, and many false prophets shall rise and deceive many. And because of the increase of lawlessness, the love of many shall grow cold. But the one who endures unto the end shall be saved. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophets stand in a holy place, then there shall be great suffering, such as has not been from the beginning of the world unto now. No, and never will be. And if those days had not been shortened, no one would be saved. For wherever the carcass is, there the vultures will gather. Immediately after the suffering of those days, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light. And the stars shall fall from the heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Then there shall be weeping and grinding of teeth. Has this human journey arrived at its conclusion? Has humanity fully realized its worst self? We may have felt like misfits and outcasts in a world that tells us there is no meaning to life, no answer to the question, why? The system that knows us only as numbers has told us that our days are numbered. In this re-education, in this brainwashing, our minds have not been cleansed but actually defiled, leaving us hopeless as the machine of nihilism presses on. The belief that there's no meaning or purpose has become so widespread and pervasive, has entered so thoroughly and deeply into our minds and hearts that it seems normal. Mentally, socially, environmentally, psychologically, and spiritually. Have we come to the end? The answer is no. We may feel like we are dying, but we are called to be reborn. We have come through fire and water in our rebellion against the world. We have fought against its wicked ways through our music, art, and philosophy of life. We have been thrown into darkness, and we stand now in the shadow of death. The youth of the apocalypse must rise up. We must face the enemy and conquer. The first step we must take is to recognize the enemy for who he is and look him in the eye. We are fighting the machine of nihilism. The mad prophet of nihilism, Friedrich Nietzsche, defined nihilism in its absolute form. That there is no truth, that there is no thing in itself. This alone is nihilism, and of the most extreme kind. It is to this end of nihilism that the world has come today. This is the abyss of darkness, for without truth, there is no light. The statement, "there is no truth," is itself a metaphysical statement. It is not made from sensible knowledge and cannot be proven. Rather, it is a confession of faith in untruth. That there is no absolute state of affairs is itself an absolute statement with its own truth claim. In claiming its own absolute truth that there is no absolute truth, nihilism contradicts itself and proves its own utter falsehood. In such a nihilistic philosophy, or more accurately, faith in untruth, one is left only with a vague hope in relative truth. Yet if we look to modern man's gauge of truth, science, the concept of relative truth is obliterated. If there were no absolute principles of truth to begin with, there would be no criteria by which we classify anything as knowledge or truth. As Johnny Cash stated in one of his songs,
"And the lonely voice of youth cries, what is truth?
The moment we decide to seek truth is the moment when our lives begin to come together and start to make sense. The pursuit of truth is the pursuit of meaning and purpose. And answers to these questions are essential not only for surviving but thriving as a human being. This goes back to the first part of this video and the inscription on the painting that asks, where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? The three questions that we ask about origin, purpose, and destiny are philosophical in nature, and the worldview that we choose to answer these three questions is purely philosophical. Religion itself can also be considered philosophy, since the two are essentially mirrors of one another. They both seek answers to these grandiose questions. In recent times, the pursuit of philosophy, which was once the zenith of human reason, isn't of much importance in the modern world. Philosophy has diminished while science has taken the lead in people's thinking when making worldview decisions. As the writer and historian Will Durant put it, science seems always to advance, while philosophy seems always to lose ground. In modern times, we have come to value science as the highest form of knowledge, and in so doing, we have divorced it from philosophy. As a consequence, there is a great chasm that separates science and religion, and many passionately believe that the two should have nothing to do with each other. However, these pillars of civilization are like two ancient friends who, together, once upheld all knowledge and wisdom. But over time, they grew tired of one another and began bickering about who was superior, and now they are stubborn arch-enemies. They were old friends in that they worked together to help us understand everything we possibly could about the universe. But definitions and methods caused confusion and derision, which led to enmity. We have inherited this enmity. For the modern skeptic non-theist, philosophical questions cannot be subject to scientific method. And for the modern skeptic theist, there is a fear that science will somehow dislodge one's worldview or faith in God. For skeptics of both camps, this topic is a virtual battlefield. And as with most wars, fear and pride are the reasons for the conflict. If one removes fear and pride, there is no conflict between the two, but actually a harmony or completeness. This is ultimately a balance between knowledge and wisdom, and nature and creator. Science explains the how, while religion explains the why in the universe. As traditional religious and philosophical worldviews vanish, a new worldview is emerging, called scientism. In the modern mind, this explains everything. This is empirical and the only trusted belief system. But in scientism, we forget that science is always tentative, and new discoveries and new theories are always emerging and supplanting earlier theories. We remember that science is not a worldview, but a method for learning. But what about the philosophical side to human understanding? Albert Einstein seemed to think, our time is distinguished by wonderful achievements in the fields of scientific understanding and the technical application of those insights. Who would not be cheered by this? But let us not forget that knowledge and skills alone cannot lead humanity to a happy and dignified life. Humanity has every reason to place the proclaimers of high moral standards and values above the discoverers of objective truth. What humanity owes to personalities like Buddha, Moses, and Jesus ranks for me higher than all the achievements of the inquiring and constructive minds. I believe in intuition and inspiration. Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world. Science has some answers as to how the physical world is governed. Despite its discoveries, however, the most fundamental questions still remain unanswered. How did the universe come into existence, and how did life begin? Theories are changing all the time. Where did the elementary particles come from? It is a scientific law of nature that matter, or rather energy, cannot be created or destroyed. This is the paradox of science. Its creation must be supernatural. Here, man's knowledge and his sciences find their limit, and metaphysics begins. If science cannot answer the deepest questions concerning existence, who will? Contemporary scientists are at a loss. They possess a wealth of information, a maze of theories about existence, life, and death. Looking to science and nature, we can only see the truths of physics revealed in the universe. Two things are realized. One, the universe is upheld by an unseen principle of truth. And two, man, who is part of the universe, is therefore totally subject to these unseen realities of truth. The point is that the idea of relative truth has only to do with man's understanding of life, and nothing to do with the truth itself. Man tells himself it's all relative. He mistakes the changes in the material world for the invisible principles of truth that govern the material world. The idea of relative truth is an escape from the question of truth. The bottom line is that in the proclamation of relative truth, man is caught in a lie that reveals the untruth in himself and has nothing to do with the question of absolute truth. In the end, relative truth is a self-contradiction, as is its mother, nihilism, and is actually just another form of nihilism in disguise. The youth of today are a rootless generation floating in the mire of corruption in a nihilistic world. Yet, within each one of us is planted a seed of truth that recognizes the surrounding mire of falsehood. It is that image of truth within us that sparks the rebellion against the sea of lies we are drowning in. Truth cannot root in falsehood. When that spark of truth dies within us, our rebellion churns into a double negative. Hate cannot cast out hate. Until our rebellion is rooted in truth, it will not be successful in conquering the world that oppresses us. If we continue to rebel in a spirit of greed, anger, and hatred, we will defeat ourselves. We will become unto ourselves that very spirit of destruction against which we are fighting. We are fighting against the father of lies, the one who abides when truth is absent. We are fighting against nihilism, the spirit of Antichrist, whose fruits produce madness, suicide, slavery, murder, and destruction. It is this spiritual wickedness that has killed God in the hearts of mankind. But God is not dead. It is only the soul of modern man that is dead. God is waiting with open arms to embrace his children. Come unto me, all who are burdened and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Only seek me out. This is the question that lies at the bottom of every heart. From the beginning of time, philosophers have quarreled over this question more than any other. The question of truth is itself the core of all philosophy, science, and religion. How do we perceive truth? Can we know truth? How is truth revealed? A foreshadowing of the revelation of truth took place in ancient China, where there lived a wise man named Lao Tzu. He gave his life to the study of human nature and the natural world. After a lifetime spent in contemplation on the mystery of life, Lao Tzu arrived at the philosophy of Tao, way or path of life. In his book, the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu writes poetically about his observations of certain truths of life revealed in human nature and the natural world. These poetic observations reveal the philosophy of a universe that is upheld by an unseen force. Through expressing bits of truth, Lao Tzu reveals the greater truth that governs the whole of creation. This is the beginning of an understanding of truth as a singular, unseen, and absolute God. "100 years after Lao Tzu came the Greek philosopher Socrates. In a world dominated by pagan beliefs in multiple gods, Socrates taught the philosophy of a universe supported by a single truth, an unseen wisdom. In Greek, this understanding of truth is expressed by the word logos, which translates as word or word of truth. Wholly dedicated to the path of wisdom and virtue, Socrates lived an ascetic life of abstinence and meditation on philosophy, and taught a doctrine of renunciation and the pursuit of the one truth. Socrates was followed by many disciples who emulated his style of life. Because of his radical way of life and his great influence among the youth, the pagan world of Greece was stirred up, and Socrates, like a true rebel against falsehood, was persecuted for his beliefs and way of life. Finally, he was put on trial, given the choice of renouncing his philosophy and confessing foolish ideas about pagan gods, or death. He chose the latter. In the revelation of truth, God did not leave mankind without a way to live for this truth. Jesus Christ may not have written any books, but he did provide us with a clear way to him. In his teaching, we see that he came to reestablish the link between God and humanity. And he was not ambiguous in what he asked of his disciples and even us after his death and resurrection. He came to gather together all who desire to live for God above all things. He came to establish his ecclesia, which translates from Greek as gathering or church. He is the door to this church. As he said, "I am the door. By me, if any man enters, he shall be saved." He gave the Great Commission to establish this church to his followers. To Peter, one of his apostles, he said, "And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it." In order to begin to understand such a mystical thing as the church that God has given humanity for its spiritual progress, we must completely abandon any preconceived ideas of what the word church means. For in this age of religious division and destruction, we have been given a shattered picture of what the church is. The original and historic Church of Christ, as founded by him through his apostles, is not an earthly institution. It is the body of people who confess and worship the truth of God. This church, as understood since its beginning, has two inseparable parts: the church in this world and the church in the other world. There is no division between its earthly and heavenly realms. It is from this connection with the heavenly church that is comprised of the great saints of old that the earthly church receives grace. The church in this world is the assembly of believers who co-struggle and co-suffer on the path towards God. The otherworldly church is the assembly of saints in heaven who ran the race and finished their course and attained to the cause. Both exist and work together, making an overlapping of this world and the other world. After the resurrection, Christ told the apostles, "Go and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit." From Jerusalem, the apostles and disciples of Christ traveled to diverse and distant lands, preaching the truth of Christ. Peter and Paul went to Asia Minor, present-day Turkey, Greece, and Rome. Mark and Philip went to Ethiopia. Thomas went to India. Andrew went to Russia and Romania. Mary Magdalene went to France. Aristobulus, one of the 70, went to England. Thus, the Church of Christ was formed in apostolic times by those in contact with the direct teachings and authority of Christ himself. Perhaps the world's best-kept secret is the fact that this original church, known as the Orthodox Church, still exists today, preserving its original, ancient, apostolic, and otherworldly spirit. Even in these last times, the Orthodox Church has maintained the rites and teachings of the original church that have been preserved since the beginning. The reason why the Orthodox Church of Christ has survived nearly 2,000 years until this day and will continue until the end of time is that the truth of God is beyond space and time. The purpose of the church is to unite the individual soul with God in a bond that passes through bodily death and continues eternally. It was founded first upon the sufferings of Christ, then upon the suffering of his apostles, and finally upon the sufferings of the martyrs and believers throughout the ages. We were given the great and otherworldly ideal of Orthodox Christianity as the link between God and man in belief and faith. Contrary to modern belief, the purpose of the church is not to judge or to impose rules. As St. John Chrysostom said, the church is a hospital, not a courtroom for souls. The church and her teachings are designed for healing the broken, restoring the lost, and inspiring the believers. It is the way to restore one's right relationship with God, and is the most direct way to attaining communion with Him. Its power and effectiveness is proven in that it has endured centuries of persecution and adversity, and has never been destroyed or conquered. Through history, against seemingly impossible odds, the Church has been preserved by the uncompromising, unconquerable believers who have never wavered in living and even dying for her eternal cause, for the cause of furthering God's message of eternal faith, hope, and love for all. In this shattered world, which is coming to an end, it is now so very clear As the war of man against God continues, it has ceased with us. We are no longer children of darkness, but are the children of the light. For we know our origin. We have lived through our death and have been resurrected. We now know the difference between deformity and beauty, evil and good, hate and love. And to speak of love is to dare to speak of God, for God is love. Thus, God is not dead, for who can kill love? It is this love that is worth dying for daily. For He is worthy of our ultimate sacrifice, for He first died for us. We have survived the hell of this dying world, and now know that the kingdom of heaven is within us. As the world continues in death, we will carry the cross of life, for we see clearly the hell around us, but choose to be crucified personally, mystically, for crucifixion is the only way to resurrection. Thank God we have been given wisdom from on high, the path towards healing our brokenness and the broken world around us. The teachings for the spiritual life that we want to lead are simple. In all things we will increase detachment to all things of this world and increase our attachment to God. We must decrease so that God's presence inside of us can increase. In His crucifixion and resurrection, Christ thrashed the gates of hell and unshackled those who were in its chains. He trampled down death by death and gives life to those in the grave. And He leaves us with these simple instructions for the last true rebellion. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted.
Blessed are the meek,
for they shall inherit the earth.
Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness,
for they shall be filled.
Blessed are the merciful,
for they shall obtain mercy.
ഇരുദയത്തിൽ ചുറ്റമുള്ളവർക്ക്,
for they shall see God.
waxaa barakaysan kuwa nabadda ka shaqeeya,
car ils seront appelés fils de Dieu.
Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake,
for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you,
and utter all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake.
But as for now, there abides faith, hope, and love, these three. But the greatest of these is love.
When I was 23 years old and had been living in the monastery as a monk in training for 3 years, I found myself in a remote hermitage on the deserted end of an island in Alaska with no running water, no electricity, and with only the basic means of survival. I was separated from the nearest town by miles of volatile ocean waters, and the only way out was by traversing the ocean in an old wooden boat or walking miles through the deep, boggy forest. During the day with the other monks, I would chop firewood, put up fish for the winter, conduct the monastery cycle of prayers, and retire at night to a small cabin a stone's throw away from the ocean. The lifestyle was extremely arduous, both physically and mentally, but produced a contentment I had never known before. The contrast of this simple monastic life compared to where I was just 3 years prior was stark and surreal. Back then, I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area, on the streets and in warehouses with like-minded, lost young people. We were disillusioned by conventional life, the status quo, and all the emptiness offered by the quote-unquote American dream. By day, I was a musician, and at night, I would cut myself with razor blades and cry out to God for answers and direction. Growing up, I was the average kid, a product of a broken family and modern American pop culture. It seemed as if I had been in survival mode since the age of 3. When my parents divorced, my whole world imploded.
There's something naturally pleasing about
One of my earliest memories is being asked by my stepmother if I believed in God. I said I didn't know what she was talking about. She suggested I ask God into my heart, and I did. Although that was a good step, it seems like it was downhill from there. I was raised mostly by my well-intentioned father and stepmothers, but in a blur of alcoholism, drug use, neglect, tension, and fighting, with a dash of religion just for good measure. Like many kids, I was raised with absolutely no point of reference for understanding the world. Because of this, I was restless and confused, with an ever-increasing inner despair. Growing up in a broken home, I saw a world filled with purposelessness, fighting, injustice, fear, chaos, lies, and very little love. This drove me to seek answers in books. I started building my library in my teenage years, driven by the desire to understand the world and to find meaning and purpose in it. I would spend hours combing through bookstores in a desperate search for some semblance of meaning. I looked to books on science for meaning, but found only physical principles and interesting explanations of the natural world. I browsed the self-help sections and found many competing and confusing opinions from all sorts of self-proclaimed experts. But when I entered the religion and philosophy sections, I discovered a treasure trove of big ideas and endless possibilities. This became my favorite aisle. Over time, my sorrow and instability grew. When I turned 18, I packed up my books and set out on a journey to find purpose, happiness, and love. I wandered from my small hometown into the dark alleys and shadows of the big inner city, where I saw the world with all its glitter and gore. I was homeless for a few months, slept on floors and couches, eventually lived with some crazy people involved in the occult, ate from dumpsters. My whole sole concern was simply to survive. I occupied myself by playing in punk bands and metal bands, reading books on philosophy and religion, and wandering the streets with friends. I was mugged, dodged bullets from gang wars, narrowly escaped brushes with prostitution, and had a series of wildly dysfunctional relationships that were based on lust and insecurity. Through it all, I managed to maintain a firm belief in God. Through a series of events, I ended up in a religious bookstore in Northern California. Here, I encountered an Orthodox nun who challenged my view of the world. Through her, I learned about church history, theology, the lives of saints, and monasticism. The moment I learned that I could visit a monastery, I packed my bags and walked through the gates of the monastery in the wilderness of Northern California. It took me about a year to process and dispose of all the garbage and trauma that my soul had accumulated. After a couple years of struggling in the monastic life, I was asked if I wanted to go to Alaska. I was thrilled to have the opportunity to live at this remote island monastery. That winter, there was just one other monk and myself carrying on the monastic life on the island. Due to Alaska being so far north, the daylight hours were very few, so I took advantage of the darkness by reading and writing. During the day, we often discussed the plight of modern youth and how to build bridges of support. At the time, I was writing an article about how nihilism and relativism were destroying the soul of the younger generation. I didn't have a computer or a typewriter, but I did have a ream of paper. Writing by hand and by candlelight in a small cabin in the middle of nowhere, far from the tumult of the urban life. The article turned into a large manuscript. The end result was this book, Youth of the Apocalypse.